Welcome, welcome, everyone. We are sitting here with Joseph Selbie, who's based in the foothills of California, you said, right?
Near Nevada City.
Near Nevada City. And welcome, welcome. We're super excited to have him here because I read this book over a year ago now, actually, and just couldn't put it down. So we're excited to have you here. So welcome.
Thank you. My pleasure.
So before we get started, I just want to give viewers a little bit of background on you, people who are new to your work. Joseph Selbie is an avid follower of the unfolding new paradigms of science and known for creating bridges of understanding between the modern evidence-based discussions of science and the ancient experience-based discoveries of the mystics. It's right up our alley. He's a dedicated Kriya meditator for nearly 50 years. You don't look that old. And you've taught yoga and meditation throughout the US and Europe. And you're also the founding member of Ananda, which we spoke about briefly before we started today. It's been around since 1968. Is that right?
Yeah, so I was a founding member. I didn't actually come along until 1975.
Okay, but soon. I mean, you were part of the early days.
Early days, yes.
And then lastly, and this is how we found out about your work, you are the author of The Physics of God, which is a great name. I don't know who came up with it, but it's brilliant. And his most recent book, and we'll be talking about both today, the most recent one is Breakthrough the Limits of the Brain. So it appears from reading your book and learning a bit about your background that you love this, divide, or you love creating the bridge to the divide, I should say, between science and spirituality. Was there an aha moment earlier on in your life that led you to do this? And if so, what was it?
Well, the aha moment started with a glimpse of what lies beyond science, in a sense. I grew up in a family of sort of scientific-minded people. My eldest brother is an engineer. I had relatives who were doctors and engineers. My father was very much science-oriented. I like to joke that dinner table conversation required references. You couldn't make a point unless you could refer to some fact. And so I went off to college, University of Colorado, thoroughly expecting to get a degree in some discipline of science and end up in that kind of life going forward. But midway through my time there at UC, I had this profound hallucinogenic experience. Now, it wasn't my first. I had a lot of what I call recreational hallucinogenic experiences where you ran around with your friends and saw lights in weird ways and laughed a lot. But this was decidedly different and more profound. I felt at peace like I'd never been before. I felt the moment was sacred. I felt the presence of spirit. It felt like a gift that I was receiving. And I just felt absolutely wonderful. And it lingered for many days, which was unusual for the kind of experiences I usually had. They were over the next day and everything was back to normal. But I really felt changed. I felt transformed by this experience. And it lingered into a full week. So it's really from that I really shifted my focus from science to trying to understand what I had just experienced, and most importantly, trying to figure out, how do I get it again? How do I have this kind of experience on a regular basis? And I knew already, because I'd had so many other hallucinogenic experiences, that taking more psilocybin or whatever was not going to do it, because you always come back to earth, so to speak. So that got me going, looking into various spiritual teachings. I found my way to the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda, author of the Autobiography of a Yogi.
We love him.
Say that again.
We love his work. Yeah.
Oh, it's been so seminal for so many people. years ago in an interview with Phil Goldberg, who wrote American Veda. And American Veda is really kind of a what do you call it? A family tree of spiritual teachers who lived in the West or were, Americans. And he said that of the 200 interviews he performed with all these people that eventually ended up in his book in some way, he said they mentioned one book. All of them most often mentioned one book, which was Autobiography of a Yogi, that had the most influence on the way their lives unfolded. So Yogananda is often called the father of yoga and meditation in the West. Because he came early. He arrived in the 1920s. He passed away in 1946. He got a lot of trends established, in particular, of great interest to me, was that he could describe the spiritual teachings of India, oftentimes using Western science. And even though, we often look to Fritjof Capra's seminal book, Tao of Physics, as being kind of the ignition point for these kinds of books, Yogananda was writing about it in 1946, 25 years before that. So when I discovered Yogananda's teachings and had my scientific background, I just loved it because I could dive into spiritual teachings, dive into a worldview that included God, and yet I didn't have to leave science behind. I didn't have to, just throw it out because it didn't fit dogmatically, so to speak, with Yogananda's teachings. It was just the opposite. Yogananda's teachings embraced science. And that really led me step by step to a life of meditation, a life of living at Ananda community here in Northern California and other communities around the world, beginning in 1975.
Wow, really profound. I mean, it's funny because a friend of ours, quite a ways into our spiritual journey, and I hadn't read it yet. Actually, I'd heard of it, but a friend of ours said, "What do you mean you haven't read this yet? When you're doing the work that you do, you got to read it." And so I ordered it, and I thought, it's 500 and something pages. You've got to be kidding me. But I couldn't put it down. I mean, I think I finished it in 2 days or something, 2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to just ask a quick question about your experience that you had. And you said it kind of lingered and lingered for a few days with you. And you were wondering, how do I get that again? How do I produce that? How do I stay in that field, whatever it is? What is it that were you able to find a way to get back into that resonance field, that sensation, that feeling that you had during that experience? And what did you do to do that? If you were able to succeed in getting back there?
The key was meditation. So whatever exactly hallucinogenic chemicals do, one of the things that they do is kind of disconnect you from the habitual patterns of thinking and feeling and reacting that you've built up. And part of the book, Break Through the Limits of the Brain, is about what you've built up, all these circuits that you have built up that kind of put you on autopilot. But before I ever sort of tuned into the neuroscience behind Break Through the Limits of the Brain, I had already experienced that when you meditate, it too takes you out of automatic pilot. And the combination of learning to sit with stillness and to bring your mind to a focus automatically gives you uplifting feelings. And the longer you can stay in it, stay with it, so to speak, the deeper those feelings and the longer those feelings and perceptions and clarity of mind linger. So really what I found is that by learning to meditate and having a regular meditation practice, I could reach the same point of wonderful experience that I'd had way back in college, sometimes exceed it, sometimes not reach it. We're human beings. We go up and down. We have streaks. I'll have periods where meditation is utterly wonderful. I'll have periods where meditation is challenging. My mind is restless. But overall, I would say definitely I learned to get back to that experience.
Yeah, and I love how you say that, we're human beings and we fluctuate, because I think a lot of times when people, especially early meditators, if they don't reach this place of nirvana, or if they don't have an experience after a while, they think they're doing it wrong, or they beat up on themselves. And I think it's important to be kind to ourselves, right? That there's no one way to do it. Whatever it takes is whatever it takes. Start where you are, as the famous saying goes.
The worst outcome of that is that people say, well, I'm just not a meditator. That they just close that door. And that's the thing that is the worst outcome of having difficulty, which everyone has, first learning to meditate.
Before we get into the new book, I wanted to talk about this light show illusion of matter that you talk about in the Physics of God. Can you explain that in terms that people can understand, but beyond the Maya illusion, right, that people might be more familiar with, because you take it a step further?
Well, I have to say that I'm by far and away not the first person to present this view of reality. There are a number of good books out there that tackle this same subject, but essentially, as far back as Einstein's theory of relativity, physicists knew that matter was an illusion, that matter isn't an enduring reality, but it's a stage of energy, sort of congealed energy, if you will, and that matter itself doesn't truly exist. Only energy exists that underlies matter. So the reason why the universe is a light show illusion is because the light of energy, the light of light that is in E equals mc squared, is masquerading as matter. Or another way to think of it, it's not so much that matter isn't there, it's that it isn't what it seems, in the way that a magician's illusion is there, but it isn't what it seems. So what physics tells us over and over about the nature of matter, and what huge experimental programs like CERN in Switzerland tell us, is that matter, when it is examined at very, very microscopic, submicroscopic, subatomic levels, behaves like energy. It doesn't behave like matter at all. There are no infinitesimally small little tiny spheres of matter that make up everything. There's just energy vibrating in consistent patterns. And that is the fundamental building block of all matter that we perceive with our senses. So the world is not what it seems.
There's that interesting scene in the Yogananda book where he's going on this journey, and I think it's one of his gurus, and a whole scene, a whole village kind of appears, right? This projection. He said it was more real than the world that he lived in, right? The physical, or the perceived physical world that he lived in, it felt more real than our everyday life. than the kitchen appliances in our kitchen, right? So,
And what could be more real than that? I think we also get that kind of confirmation from near-death experiencers who have these profound, transcendent experiences, leaving their body, their physical body behind, and yet still having an energy body, an astral body, a form that appears to them the same as their physical body, but they gradually realize that it is made of light. And they have, some of them, go all the way into heavenly experiences where they're interacting with other beings and where they're in realms of surpassing beauty and beguiling loveliness. And when they come back, they say, this world is the fake world.
mm,
This world is the world that isn't true. That world feels more real than anything that they experience in this one, or in a very real, through the senses. What the senses perceive and what the picture the minds build up, our minds build up, is the less real illusion than the more real experience in heavens.
mm.
I just want to kind of speak about that a little bit, about matter itself and energy and light and things like that. This body here, this perception, this matter, we are made of matter. Isn't that correct? Are we made of matter? Or is that just our perception that we're made of matter? Is it an illusion that we're made of matter?
Or did the collective consciousness create the matter?
Because it feels like it's real. It seems real. I can cut myself and it appears real. But is that just an illusion?
Well, Yogananda once said, amusingly, he said, if you hit your dreamlike head on a dreamlike wall, it hurts.
Yes.
So it is real and it isn't real simultaneously. It's not that it isn't there, it just isn't what it seems. So while you're, touching your arm like that and saying, this is matter, it is true that it is matter to the extent that matter appears to us as a real substance, because what you're using is other matter to touch it, and you're getting information about it going through your nervous system, through your senses and into the mind. And the mind is saying, yes, this is what your body looks like. This is how it, what it weighs, what it feels like when it touches other objects. All that does have a reality, but there's a more subtle, deeper reality simultaneously, because we have two bodies.
Mm-hmm.
We have an astral body, or an energy body, if you want. And there's some fascinating support for this from M theory, which I can get into if you like. But we have an energy body that is interpenetratingly meshed in our physical body. And it all vibrates at a higher frequency than the physical body. So it's undetectable to scientific instruments. It's undetectable to our senses. But our thoughts, our emotions, our life force, our memories, all of these things are energetic. They're not physical. And that's why, again, with the experience of near-death experiencers, when they no longer have the body, like a cloak, like an extra heavy set of clothes, when they no longer have that, they marvel at the fact that they feel just the same way they did. They have the same thoughts. They have the same feelings. They have the same memories. They feel a lot better. They feel expanded. They feel released. They feel a sense of freedom. But nonetheless, they recognize that they still have this kind of body, but all these non-corporeal aspects to ourselves are right there with them. And when they come back to the body, they realize, well, the body isn't doing that. The brain isn't generating thoughts for me. The brain isn't generating memories for me or storing memories. The brain is more like a switchboard or a radio than it is creating thoughts, etc. So the physical body, again, is real. Matter is real, if you want to think of it that way. But the energy body is more fundamental, more real than is the physical.
Is this body, this corporal thing that we're in,
The shell.
is it less important than the spiritual body or the energetic body?
Well, there's several ways to answer that. If you didn't have an energy body, you wouldn't have a physical body. So your physical existence, the physical body that we have and operate through, is continuously manifested by the energy body. So does that make it more important? Perhaps you could think of it that way. But if you want to be here in the physical realm, you pretty much have to have a physical body to operate in. So in that sense, it's more important than the energy body in the necessity to have it to operate. I used the example, I forget whether it was in my book or not, but that if you're going to enter this realm of the physical world, you have to be encased in something that functions in the physical world. And I use the analogy of like a deep sea diver. You can't go deep sea diving unless you've got the suit on, right?
Right.
You'd be crushed and die in that instance, but you need to be able to function in whatever realm you're in. So yes, the physical body is important. I think for us, with a spiritual point of view in our lives, it's important to use the body well, keep it healthy, keep it functioning so that you can do the work you want to do in this world, so that you can serve others, so that you can learn to love. There's a lot of things that you can't do without it. Mm-hmm. But I would also say it's really important to learn to transcend it, to learn to meditate, which basically takes you beyond the awareness of the physical body. And you're not suddenly aware of something else. You're just continuously more and more aware of your energy body.
It was on my list to talk to you about. So this would be a perfect segue, because this was something I was going to read from your new book. And that's in the chapter called We Have Two Bodies, right? Which I just loved. So I'm just going to read a little excerpt since it's a good segue to what we've been talking about. This is, you do the reference point of the experiential teachings of the world, from yoga to Sufism to mystical Christianity to Zen Buddhism, the Kabbalah to modern mysticism, tells us that most of what we routinely experience right now in every moment does not actually exist in the physical world. Life force, emotions, thoughts and memories, personalities and character subtly coexist with and interpenetrate the physical body. These subtle aspects of ourselves are just as real, just as present, just as immediate as body and brain. They just aren't physical. So I thought that was, just kind of interesting, because then, obviously you go in, and one of the things that I really love about the curation of this book, not only have you done the research and added your own insights, but you bring in so many other physicists and scientists and quantum biologists and ancient spirituals as well, with their perspective on what you're talking about.
Yeah, I've always found that those quotes, which I always love when I come across them, whether in somebody else's book or in a book I'm reading by that author or by that saint or mystic, there's certain quotes that just have power, and they lend clarity, and they lend, I think, a confirming immediacy to the things I talk about that I'm not necessarily able to do it with a more narrative style.
Yeah, no, I think it's great actually, because, there's something that kind of came up in our interview with Matt Kahn, the guy known as the I love you guy. But love. But, he spoke about when you read something that is true, right? Not necessarily true from perspective, but innately you feel it to be true, right? It lights you up, right? It vibrates your body. It sort of, so I think that's kind of what you're talking about. It's like when you see these quotes that feel true, even if you can't even understand them completely, there's a resonance.
Yeah. There's a lot of power to them.
Yeah. You mentioned in the beginning that we are light, light beings. And I always start thinking about that as being a light being. And what does that mean? What does it mean to be a light being? Is it infinite? Are we infinite beings if we are light beings? Are our energetic bodies infinite? And if so, where do they come from? What is its source? What is the source that gives us this light, this ability to become whatever we choose to be? What is this source exactly?
Well, I would say the source is spirit, and that spirit manifests creation through the agency of light. And so we are clothed in bodies of light. And then when we take physical incarnation, we're clothed in bodies that are both physical, but yet we still have our light body, our astral body interpenetrating the physical. But that the intelligent light that creates the entire cosmos, I believe, originates in spirit, and that each one of us is a spark of that spirit. Each one of us is godlike. If we but knew our potential, we would be astonished. We would be so moved by what we are, because we are infinite spirit, and we are not the physical body. We're not even the energy body. We are beyond. We are bodiless and yet infinite. Or as Yogananda put it, the cosmos is our body, and the light that creates it is at the core of our being.
It's we are the time and space.
Yeah.
Right? We make up the time and space. We're not separate from it. We make up God. We're not separate from it.
I understand.
Yeah, but it is a dichotomy. It seems like the both can't be true. Mm-hmm. And part of the reason why we tend to think that way is because we are steeped in Western logic. Mm-hmm. So you either are spirit or you aren't, right? You can't be spirit but not manifesting as spirit. That being and both is foreign to Western thinking, particularly to Western philosophers. That's why in the sort of Christian tradition, the most you could hope for was to be a saint, which was to be, utterly, how do I want to put it? Utterly supportive of Jesus and God the Father, but never able to be Jesus or God the Father. Where Eastern teachings don't have that limitation. Mm-hmm. Eastern teachings just start right off with the Atman is Brahman, the self is God, and go from there. So even though this was a limitation of many Christian teachings, when you read the books written by Christian saints like Teresa of Avila and St. Francis and Augustine, what they describe they're experiencing is that they're one with God.
Yes.
Whatever the theologians of their time had to say about it, what they said about it was that they felt this utter oneness with spirit.
Yeah, and so in the West, we're all traumatized from the dogma of traditional religions trying to keep us separate from God or source for so long. And so now it's more than just the logic of our linear brains. It's also the conditioning for so many years that we're separate.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, that conditioning is very powerful. And even if you believe you aren't separate, chances are you'll behave as if you're separate.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually.
Right. Because it runs deep. And in fact, Yogananda said that the ego, his definition of ego, was the conviction that you are separate. That's what is the root of ego. And so giving up ego is really about overcoming that illusion of separateness and merging consciously into what you already are, becoming aware of what you already are, and letting the ego fall away. The other thing that I find really refreshing about one of Yogananda's teachings in this regard is that you'll find a lot of people who approach the high spiritual teachings, but can't quite feel comfortable with this notion that they're going to become one with God, because it seems to imply that they are just going to disappear. That it's a kind of death in a way. And maybe theoretically they're willing to do it, but on some level they're worried that, well, do I just become nothing? And Sri Yukteswar, Yogananda's teacher, said that you become one with God without any loss of individuality. And I loved that comment because, again, there's no logic to it. I mean, how can I become one with God and still be an individual, right? The logic says you can't do both. But the masters just say, this is the way it is, right? They don't get trapped in theological puzzles.
I think that's true because, the way, so we do teaching as well. And a lot of times how we describe it is that you are God, you are one with God. You're an aspect of it, right? This is the quantum piece. You're the one thread of the hair, but you're the all, right? You're the subatomical particles, but you're the whole universe as well. And so when you merge with it, there is a shift that does take place in the personality level a little bit. You don't lose yourself, but I do think you change, right? You become more.
I think you change as you all the way along, as you refine yourself and purify yourself, and you are able to separate out in your own awareness, what is enduring, lasting aspects of yourself and what is temporary. Maybe it's personality, maybe it's desires, but that there's a core of individuality that each one of us is unlike anyone else, unlike any other spark of the divine. And that's what I think we get more and more aware of, is what is that unique spark that is us, and not that we're 49er fans, those things drop away, right? And
well said.
It may not drop away soon for many of us, but it is something that we gradually learn.
I think it's okay to be one with source, one with God, one with the infinite consciousness, but still be a 49er fan if you want to be. I think you can do both things. Sometimes people are unaware that in order to be God, in order to understand this godness, this unity of consciousness, you don't have to completely give yourself away. You don't have to go into a cave and meditate, 24 hours a day. It can be obtained now, here, in this moment, in this present moment, if you want it to be.
So there's a fear that you have to give up these things about yourself. But then what ends up happening, this is the beautiful piece, is that they fall away naturally because you're no longer interested. You're not plugging into this collective consciousness of mass media. You're not plugging into this mass consciousness of fear and conspiracy theories or whatever happens to be the fear story of the day.
Well, as you say, it just drops away because it's no longer something that serves you or you want. There's a lovely story, which I'm afraid I don't remember the historical characters that were in this story, but a Revolutionary War general wanted to become a Quaker. And he was talking to the head Quaker at the time, or the head Quaker where he was wanting to become a Quaker. And he said, I'm really ready to do it, but can I keep my sword? As a general, he worked really hard for the honor of being able to wear that sword, and meant a lot to him. And the Quaker said to him, you can wear it as long as you can. And I thought there was so much wisdom in that the spiritual growth is not about tearing things away from yourself that you're attached to. It's about growing into new ways of being that let those things naturally just fall away.
Yeah, that was beautifully said, actually. I mean, it's amazing, right? At a certain point where, it no longer matters. What was the phrase that came up in an interview the other day? It's something about when you expand your consciousness into this new, greater awareness, and you're expanding at such a degree, you don't have to try to become this new unity consciousness. There's just no other way to be. Because it's kind of emergent, if you like.
Yeah. In the Indian teachings, they call that smriti, which means memory. So spiritual experience is remembering who and what you are. You're not creating anything. You're just kind of waking up and going, wow, this feels fabulous. And I wish I could stay in this all the time. Yeah. And you remember that it always was you. It's not something that is apart from your reality. It is your reality.
Yeah, that's great. That's well said. Mm-hmm. I wanted to bring this up because this was something that was meaningful for me on my spiritual path. And still to this day, I don't know why, but it's probably because I was some Judaic teacher at some point in the past. So when I had come across the Kabbalah, like everything lit up in me, and I knew nothing about this. And the Sephirot, right? When I first saw it, there was like a remembering. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I couldn't get enough of it. And I started like memorizing, the numbers and the connections. And it's like, where is this coming from? And then, of course, you brought it up in your book as well, and you talk about the energy verse in the heavens. I was kind of curious if there's a connection that you found between the Kabbalah and the Sephirot, which is, the 10 emanations of light. We were talking about light earlier. What's the connection to these 10 emanations of light from the Kabbalah, the energy verse, the heavens, and science?
Well, I'm glad you asked me that, because it gives me a perfect excuse to talk about my favorite intersection point of science and spirituality.
Perfect.
And that intersection point is M theory. So this is going to get a little nerdy for a moment or two, but I will bring it around. So M theory is a flavor of string theory. And the basic foundation of all string theories is that there is energy existing that is vibrating at such a high frequency that it is impossible to perceive from the physical universe. And yet it is the underpinning to the physical universe. And in string theory, they have the notion that there are little vibrating rings and strings, and those rings and strings are as much smaller than the atom is smaller than the human body. So the atom is a billionth the size of the human body, and the rings and strings posited by string theory are a billionth the size of the atom. So we're talking super tiny. But we're also talking about massive amounts of energy in what I refer to as the energy verse. Now, M theory and other similar disciplines refer to this as the bulk. And I think the bulk was the worst possible word they could also ever have applied to what they're talking about. They're saying there is a reality that exists beyond and interpenetrating the physical universe that has approximately 100 or 120 times the amount of energy contained in the entire physical universe. And that energy is organized in layers called brains, branes.
Yes, yeah.
Brains being a sort of a shortened form of membrane. So there are divisions, if you will, between these different layers. And each layer has an energy density, and that energy density determines, or vice versa, the frequency determines the density determines the frequency. And the brain closest, if you want to think in those terms, to the physical universe is the least dense in comparison to the other higher brains in M theory. But each one of the successive brains has a higher energy density and therefore a higher level of frequency of that energy. Some brain world scenarios say there are 7 layers, some say there are 10 layers. It all has to do with the involved mathematics that all of it is based on to kind of work backwards. They say, well, if the Earth behaves the way it does, if the universe behaves the way it does, and it is supported by energy, then that energy has to exist in these forms. It's an amazing process of deduction, and it's all done mathematically. But those brain layers conform in many ways to the heavens of all religions. So you've got the lowest level brain has the lowest energy density. So in the heavens, the heaven closest to the earth is perhaps the least evolved, and then it works its way up through successive, increasingly more refined levels until we get to the 7th heaven. Often the Buddhists have 10, and the Tibetan Buddhists have as many as 25, very elaborate cosmologies involving heavenly layers. But the commonality is that the higher you go up into the frequencies in the brains, the higher the consciousness is, the more refined the consciousness is. And you'll find this mentioned by many near-death experiencers. They will talk about being given a tour of the heavens, and they go up through these successive layers and they describe the beings that they see. They will often wonder, well, can I just stay here? And they'll be, the being giving them the tour will sort of withdraw the protection, and the person will immediately feel uncomfortable because it's just too high of a vibration for them to feel comfortable at, and they will return them back down to a level that they are more comfortable at. So this all fits well with the various ways in which the heavens are described by the religions of the world. So we have that part of M theory. The other part of M theory that also powerfully echoes spiritual teachings, parallel spiritual teachings, is that in M theory, they posit that the earth, or the universe rather, which obviously includes the earth, but the universe is a holographic projection. And you've probably heard this from a number of different directions, and people speculate on how that can be and jokingly wonder if we're in a giant video game, et cetera. But what M theory is saying is that the intelligence, the intelligent energy that gives the laws of the physical universe their reality, they actually originate in this pure energy world that includes the heavens. So, long story short, you have the heavens manifesting the earth. You have the energy verse, intelligently organized hologram making a holographic projection from that is the physical universe. So it's a mechanism for this law that's been around in esoteric teachings for millennia.
As above, so below.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And each succeeding layer of heaven says the same thing. And in elaborate scenarios of how the various brain layers combine to be able to project the earth, there's a cascade of certain levels of support for what finally becomes the physical universe. So I just love this. In one theory with two broad arms of it, you have, and I'm sure they never meant this to be confirming of spiritual teachings. And
absolutely not. That was
they're probably appalled when they hear me talk about it. But they created a location for the heavens. They created a rationally arrived at support for there being a place where people live in pure energy bodies, in pure energy worlds. And they came up with support not only for the heavens creating the universe, and this is the part I like the best, but that they give support to the notion that each one of us has a hologram body. That creates our physical body. So we, as the teachings say, are continuously creating our own holographic projection, which is our physical body. And it's continuous. It doesn't just happen once and then stop, because our energy body has no energy limit. It can draw as much energy as it possibly needs to keep that manifestation going.
If we are the universe and the universe is always recreating itself, then it makes perfect sense that our energy bodies are always recreating themselves.
You know what I find kind of interesting sometimes, that when you go into the Torah or the Jewish Bible itself, they often speak about heavens, multiple heavens.
Yeah.
And they often will speak about 12 heavens, which they relate to the 12 tribes and things of that nature. But the thing which is really interesting is that when you think about the quantum physicists, they often say that once you go beyond 12 brains, that the math itself just starts to break apart, that it just doesn't seem to make sense anymore. They seem to be able to go to 10 to 12, but beyond that 12th layer, the math just doesn't make sense anymore. Because we are infinite beings, that we are able to occupy an infinite amount of brains, if you will, having an infinite amount of experiences.
All at the same time.
Yes, if we choose.
We're not just able to, we are.
We are.
That's right, we are.
We just happen to only be aware of this particular manifestation.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
We are.
You know, I mean, we're far from quantum physicists, but we've read a lot because we're so interested in this stuff. And, it's tough having conversations about this without upsetting some quantum physicists, because, we operate in the spiritual world. And, one of the challenges is that a lot of times they'll say, well, spiritual people are now applying quantum healing and quantum whatever, to the world of matter, big matter, when quanta really has to do with these tiny, microscopic levels, and it doesn't translate to bigger objects like the human body, right? So that's the challenge. And my understanding, and again, as someone whose field this is not, is that M theory is attempting to bridge that gap. But this is also the theory that all the quantum physicists argue about.
Yes, well, they're unable to prove their theories, but their theories are internally consistent enough that if they were true, they would result in the creation of the physical universe. So that's why I'm saying they work backwards.
Do you think, Joseph, I wonder, do you think that there's almost an unconsciousness that because they're protecting their research for so long and the materialists don't want to mess up things as they are, and it doesn't work perfectly well with Newtonian laws and all of that. So do you think there's part of it, it's like at an unconscious level that they just don't want to believe it's true?
Well, I think they actively have a belief system that doesn't allow it. And it even is given a name in scientific philosophy, which is called scientific materialism.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's a very powerful belief. It is the dominant belief of our time,
Still,
which is that there is and only can be energy and matter, and that everything will eventually be explained by some interactions between energy and matter. And that's the origin of the universe, the origin of life, the origin of consciousness. And they believe it. They believe it to the extent that they won't consider studying very reputable, scientifically organized studies about the independence of consciousness from the brain.
I know.
Just won't go there.
And there are some like peer-reviewed studies, like tons of them now.
Yeah, if you go on to the IONS site, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Institute of Noetic Sciences, you can find a page that is a favorite page of Dean Radin's, where he keeps a list of all the studies that he feels are good, solid results about psi experiences. And last time I looked, there were 164 studies.
And that's
all of which in one way or another indicate that there are realities beyond matter and energy.
Yeah. And that's, there's others out there as well. It's funny because we've interviewed Dean before, actually, right up the road. And we also interviewed Helene, who's going to be in season 2, which is called Rethinking Science, because of her book, The Science of Channeling, which gets way out there.
But I would like to think that science will eventually evolve. And there's an old saying about how scientific theories are not so much, new scientific theories aren't so much accepted because new facts prove them, but because old scientists die off. So there may be some truth to that in this situation, but newer minds are coming into bodies, and I think that the evidence is so strong, if you will just look at it, even as a hardcore scientist, that there's just no way that consciousness originates from the brain.
Yeah. And I think part of what you said, old has to die off. It's because the cognitive dissonance is so strong that they'll do anything in their power to bring back their worldview, right? That's comfortable, because it's not comfortable. And so they can't go there because it's like, and I think
belief systems are self-reinforcing. So when I say that it's the dominant belief system in the world, we're talking 2 or 3 billion people believe this, and they tell each other that it's the right way to think, right? It's really powerful. It doesn't, logic, facts, new discoveries just hardly dent it.
Well, it has been, I'm going to say this, I'm just going to say has been a collective consciousness up until now. And I think there is some fear that if this is true, then there's going to be a bridge back to spirituality, which there was way, way back when anyway. And I think there's a little bit of a fear about that being thrown into the same tub, if you like. And so that's another reason why I think they're holding on. But as things progress, as more research comes out, as the studies of heart coherence from heart math kind of start matching up, right? Suddenly we're going to see the results in people that are shifting, and then you just won't be able to deny it any longer. I think that's what's going to happen, and then the collective consciousness will slowly change.
Well, according to a Pew study of 2008 or 2009, a very slim majority of scientists believe in God or a higher power. So it's really, there's a hard core of scientific materialists. Unfortunately, they are in charge of all the journals. They are extremely influential in funding for new research. So they have a grip on that sort of scientific mechanism that people think is science. A lot of times you'll hear people say, well, science believes X. Well, science doesn't believe anything. Science is a method. It doesn't have a collective memory, and it believes in something. Scientists believe in things, but scientists are all over the map, just like other human beings. It's just as political as politics. They disagree a lot internally. One of my favorite stories about the archaeologists in America. There are the Clovis school that say the earliest possible entry of the supposed tribes from Russia going across the ice bridge and ending up in America was 13,000 BC. That's the absolute earliest it could be, because they have all these lance points that they found. Well, they've since just exploded that, and there's evidence in caves that it goes back 26,000 years, et cetera. And these two sets of archaeologists almost came to blows at a conference over that date. So it's really not about, accepting new facts. It's about, my career depends on it being no older than 13,000 BC. That's a lot of investment in scientific materialism.
I did want to ask you this question about the non-local, because I know you take more of the scientific side than the spiritual side, but this non-local, remember you were talking about like fields. We have this energy body. We know that consciousness exists out of the brain, right? So it's always there. It's non-local, and we have access to that consciousness. So in the spiritual circles, they often refer to this as the Akash, or the Akashic records.
Right.
So what is your understanding of that field that we have access to from the science side?
Well, non-locality is a central concept to quantum physics. And physicists have gone as far as to say, without non-locality, there can be no quantum physics. It's not just a tenet of it, it is a foundation to it. And non-locality says that there are phenomena that occur that don't behave local rules. So a local rule with electromagnetism would be that the farther you are from the magnetic source, the weaker the electromagnetic field. And so distance is a local law. The energy, tails off rapidly the farther away you are. But a non-local law would be that it doesn't matter how far somebody is away from somebody else in the astral regions, they can read each other's minds. So distance plays no role.
Right.
And it's not attenuated at all. It's not as if someone making a connection across, a seemingly vast region of astral space would be any less clear in the mind of the other person, assuming they could do that. So non-locality has its laws, and the local physical universe has its laws. And that's where the name comes from. It's just, it behaves non-locally. That's where we get entanglement, That's where we get the observer paradox from. So non-locality, I believe, is the same as the brains, is the same as the heavens. That the other aspect of non-locality that is very counterintuitive is that it's two-dimensional, where our world is three-dimensional. Sri Yukteswar, Yogananda's teacher, said that in the heavens, the bodies are coordinated images of light. There is no space, there is no matter, and as part of that is that time runs differently in the astral regions.
Yeah.
So as Anthony was saying, we're doing all these things simultaneously, if you will. We're living out a million different lifetimes and a million different visits to a million different heavens in eternity, in the eternal moment, because time runs differently in that respect. So non-locality is really astral, if you want. You could almost have those two words be used synonymously.
So bilocation and trilocation plays into that?
The ability to bilocate or trilocate, as I understand it, comes with a saint or sage's ability to transcend their physical body and therefore are able to manifest more than one physical body at need. I've read some stories where one of the two bodies is in a trance, but I've also read others where both bodies are active and carrying on conversations with people that are totally different.
Wow.
So I think that's a matter of mastering the physical to be able to do that kind of thing. But it would, and I'm just guessing here because I'm not sure I've ever read it, but I'm guessing that highly advanced beings in the astral regions can manifest astral bodies by the hundreds across the astral regions if they so choose, if they have some purpose, if it serves in some way for them to help others, but that the potential is there where we're locked into this body and it's very hard for us to imagine, how you manifest another one.
It's interesting the way you speak about that. I think about, I'm thinking about Yeshua, Jesus, there's absolutely no historical evidence that the man really resurrected himself. There's only evidence that they say that people saw him. And it's almost sounding as if from a scientific standpoint, that perhaps he was able to somehow, if it's true, if you go on that perception that he did this, that he was able to manifest himself in the astral plane in a way that we just don't comprehend, perhaps.
Or even from the astral, he could then also manifest another physical body.
Right.
Because he never really died. I mean, it's not as if he came back from death.
You're right.
It just that the physical body was, broken, no longer functioned. But if healers can bring people back from the dead, if Jesus could bring Lazarus back from the dead, why not his own body?
Yeah. Exactly.
I say this with nonchalant ease here, but it seems like it makes sense to me that if you have that kind of power, you could do it. The autobiography of a yogi has several stories of people being resurrected from the dead and from saints who, masters who had gone beyond, who had left their body, routinely coming back and manifesting physical bodies to their disciples or for other purposes. Mm-hmm. So I think that's what it means to be a master, according to Yogananda, is that you've mastered this physical realm, and you can shape it, make it, leave it, whatever, because you've now mastered it.
One of your chapters is, I think it's the first one, isn't it? That we are so much more than we know.
Yes, in the new book, Breaking Through the Limits of the Brain. Yeah.
I mean, if we really knew that we had the power of not just tapping into God or source, but that we are that source, that universal consciousness, then our power is really, it's completely endless.
And sometimes we accidentally prove it to ourselves. So like my hallucinogenic experience, you know, I knew beyond any doubt that I was more than I thought, and that I was part of spirit, and that state of being was very, very much more powerful than my everyday abilities and awareness. So those stories you alluded to in the beginning of breaking through the limits in the brain, many of them happened from extreme need. So one of my favorites was the story about Lindbergh, who flew across the Atlantic, the first solo flight. About halfway across the Atlantic, he started to fall asleep. And to fall asleep was to die, essentially. And he did everything that you would expect somebody to do. You know, he opened the little cockpit window and had such cold air coming in that it frosted up his windshield, and he had to stop that. And, you know, tried to do all these things. And finally, it was just this extraordinary act of concentration to stay awake. And he went in to a transcendent experience. He had spherical awareness. He said, I'm like one great eye. And he said, I am more spirit than body. And he could not really comprehend that he had his hands on something tangible. Everything felt to him like pure energy, although he didn't use that exact phrase. And once he got into that superconscious state, that transcendent state, he flew all the rest of the way to Paris without effort. And it was only towards the end of his flight that he kind of went back into his more normal awareness. And he spent the majority of his adult life trying to figure out what that was.
Yeah.
And he never found his way to meditation, but he was trying to find out how you did it from a scientific point of view and never quite got there. But it was a profound change. And there are so many ways that people manifest higher powers and abilities than most people believe are even possible.
Yeah, totally agree.
I want to just ask you just a quick kind of off the cuff question, because you spoke about in the very beginning about your family, and you always had to back up everything with some type of data or reference. How does your family react to this information that you are giving out now in the books that you're writing that are not just pure science, but a little bit of spiritual connection as well? What do they think about all of this?
Well, I had a funny phone conversation with my father once, was my father and my mother. And they were saying something about a nephew of mine or a niece or some relative. And they said, yeah, and they scored in the 99th percentile on their SATs. And I said, well, I scored in the 99th percentile on my SATs. And there was this long pause. And my father said, well, what the hell happened to you?
I knew that was coming or something like it.
So I had already been living at Ananda for many, many years, and they really didn't know what to make of me. They're gone, bless their hearts. And my siblings, we have great friendships, but we rarely ever really delve into those kind of subjects. But I will say it's important to note here that I did not traumatize my children with the necessity to present references for any arguments they wanted to make.
Bravissimo. It's that perfect blending, right?
Yeah.
And I know we're running a little over time, but I just one last question and then we can close, just because it's you speak about emergent consciousness. And I just love that because Tim Freak talks about that.
Right.
He's also, and he was actually in our season 1 pioneering philosopher from England. So he looks at spirituality and consciousness from a totally different perspective, right? Philosophy. But he speaks about this emergent consciousness, and I'm wondering what it is for you.
Well, it's a term that I can freely understand would be used in a variety of ways. What I was referring to and saying was impossible was that consciousness could emerge from the activity of neural synapses in the brain. And so that's the theory that the scientific materialists embrace, is the theory of emergent consciousness. They just don't have any proof of it. They don't even really have any good theories of it. But I could see if you took a step back and used that term in a broader way, in the expansion and evolution. I believe in reincarnation. So as animals coming up, we might have had emergent consciousness. It would have expanded. So I respect it as a useful concept, but I don't think it's possible in the way that scientific materialists think it is. I would choose the word awakening and substitute it for emergent, so that we are awakening into consciousness. That is the unfolding, is that we're becoming more awake to, more aware of what we really are. And we do it in little tiny increments, but we keep doing it.
Yeah, and that is really emergent, but maybe not in the same sense that the materialists use it or think about it. But it is this constant awakening, as you say, and unfolding of more and more expansive consciousness. Yeah, wow, this has been a great discussion, I have to say. Yeah.
Well, I thank you. It's been fun.
Yeah, it's really been fun, and we just love your work. Is there any parting words that you would like to share with viewers? Anything that you've got coming up? We'll obviously be including links so people can purchase your books.
Working on another book, an as of yet untitled book, which has to do with the science of miraculous healing and what it is that is happening and how we can make it happen, most importantly, in our own lives.
So with that, thank you so much, Joseph.
My pleasure. Thank you. It was a pleasure talking and laughing with you.